Good evening, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening for the 4th District update with Congresswoman Betty McCollum. Everyone is in mute-only mode tonight. If you are experiencing technical difficulties and need to get in touch with the moderators, please utilize the Q&A function and we can assist. Thank you for the wide variety of questions submitted over the last 2 weeks since registration opened. We have categorized them to cover as much as possible. If you had a specific question not covered tonight, or if you had a casework inquiry, and we did receive a few, we will get in touch with you directly. And with that, we will get started, and I'm going to turn it over to Congresswoman McCollum.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining me tonight for this update here from the 4th District. It's an honor and a privilege, as always, to represent you in Congress. This August, I had the opportunity to visit with so many community members and leaders about partnerships we forged, delivering for our families, building on an economy that works for all Americans. From Stillwater to Arden Hills, from White Bear Lake to St. Paul, I have totally enjoyed catching up with all of you folks on what's happening across our communities. Minnesotans, well, we are working together to make our communities even a better place to live, play, and work. Next week, I am heading back to Washington, and my top priority will be to continue to deliver for Minnesota's families, building an economy, as I said, that works for all Americans. But first, that will mean avoiding a government shutdown. It's been months of chaos and crisis since the Republicans took control of the House last January. Speaker McCarthy and his Republican conference have shown time and time again that they are unable to fulfill even the basic responsibilities of governing. In July, late in July, Speaker McCarthy chose to adjourn the House for 6 weeks without finishing the job of funding the government. Now, just 12 days remain for Congress to complete this important responsibility, or the federal government will shut down. Every year, the U.S. House, Senate, and White House must reach an agreement on how to fund the federal government in a responsible manner and to make strategic investments in priorities like quality health care, infrastructure improvements, access to housing, veteran services, national security, and so much more. It's known as the appropriations process, and because the House majority has to work with President Biden and the Democratic-controlled Senate, a bipartisan legislation has to be passed by the end of fiscal year, and that fiscal year ends on September 30th. And that's needed in order to keep the government operating. As a member of the Appropriations Committee, I take this responsibility very seriously, and I work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to keep our government open and working for the American people. These funding bills support access to health care, protection of our environment, national security, international development, job growth, and other priorities, as I had mentioned earlier. Regrettably, this year, the Republican majority that controls the House has abandoned bipartisanship. Instead, they've chose to hijack the appropriations process to force divisive and diversive and extreme social policy agenda to impose a nationwide abortion ban, marginalize the LGBTQ plus community, and along with that, marginalize communities of color. And then, can you believe it? They're even working to ban books, so much more on their social agenda. All this is on top of the draconian funding cuts that they're making that would devastate the services that our communities rely on. In fact, Republicans have gone back on the Budget Control Act deal that they made with President Biden to fund domestic programs at levels of 2023. The agreement was levels of 2022 levels, and that was passed after Memorial Day. Instead, they've chosen to gut this bipartisan process as much as $188 billion forcing, as I said, cuts to domestic investments, some up to 30%. House Republicans' appropriation bill, for example, for the labor and human services, cuts are at the 2008 level. Their agriculture bill brings funding cuts down to 2006 levels. Now, these funding cuts were last seen when George Bush was president. So make no mistakes, these tactics will not support our economy. They have no chance of winning support from the White House, the US Senate, or from House Democrats. But by wasting time in catering to 20 or more MAGA extremists in the House Republican Conference, House Republicans have greatly increased the likelihood of a government shutdown the end of September. In fact, some of these extremist Republicans have even stated that they're looking forward to a government shutdown. The GOP plan to disrupt the lives of Americans is clearly unacceptable, and it demonstrates that House Republicans, as I've said, are incapable of governing. The GOP plan jeopardizes also funding for 15 community projects that have already advanced. Gem Lake's project to ensure clean drinking water for residents. Ramsey County's emergency and public service communications network. North St. Paul's Community Center renovation. Rescue boats for Washington County. The renovation of St. Paul's Fire Station number 7 on the east side. And reconstruction of Weir Drive in Woodbury. And millions of dollars in other investments all across the 4th Congressional District. Time is running out, but I want you to know I always remain hopeful that Speaker McCarthy will join in good faith negotiations with President Biden, the Senate, and House Democrats to reach an agreement that funds the federal government so that it can continue to partner on these projects that are so important to our community. As I've said, my priority is investing in Minnesota families and building on an economy that works for all Americans, which Democrats, in fact, did last Congress working with President Biden, including right here in Minnesota. Millions of dollars for a new federal cybersecurity partnership right here in St. Paul with Metro State. Hundreds of millions of dollars to launch BioBabe, which is a clean, green, biology-based manufacturing revolution to make the products of the future right here in Minnesota, right here in the United States. In fact, last session, 4th Congressional District legislators right here took the initiative to leverage major funding investments federally and state in BioMaid. And that's a huge chance for Minnesota to remain the top dog when it comes to manufacturing into the future. And working just today, if you saw the paper, Minnesota-based Humanetics is working on a radiation protocol that they've developed that will help keep service members and civilians safe while fulfilling critical national security needs when they're working around radiation. Nationally, President Biden and Democrats have invested in America. In November 2021, we passed the bipartisan infrastructure law to provide overdue investments to rebuild America's roads, bridges, and railroads, expand access to clean drinking water, make sure we have water treatment systems that keep people safe, and to ensure that every American has access to high-speed internet. And then, on top of that, to tackle the climate crisis and advance environmental justice. And they did this all while investing in every community, including urban and rural communities that have too far often been left behind. Just 1 year ago, in August, we passed the CHIPS and Science Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. The CHIPS invest billions of dollars into research and workforce to develop and revitalize domestic manufacturing, create good paying jobs right here in America, and strengthen America's supply chain, all the while accelerating the industries of the future. These investments will ensure that American communities continue to lead the world in innovation and manufacturing. The Inflation Reduction Act is another one of these most impactful investments in our families, our communities, and our future. And it's already, right now, lowering the cost for many Minnesota families. And importantly, the law is paid for by ensuring corporations and the ultra wealthy pay their fair share. So there are no new taxes on families earning under $400,000. The impact of this law will only grow stronger for future generations as these investments grow, along with additional climate and healthcare provisions that will take effect and help American families. The Inflation Reduction Act has spurred clean energy and manufacturing investments. And this law is the largest investment in fighting climate change and clean energy production in the United States history. And we all know that that is needed. Since the Inflation Reduction Act has been signed into law, I want to point out it has spurred more than $720 million in funding for Minnesota clean energy projects that will create more than 900 jobs. I'm going to take a drink of water here. I'm sure a lot of you are suffering with allergies now too. We expand tax credits to help Americans make their homes and their small businesses more energy efficient and lower the cost of energy bills. And Minnesota is eligible for millions of dollars in planning grants to support local efforts in reducing climate pollution. The Inflation Reduction Act has lowered healthcare costs for millions of Americans by reducing out-of-pocket healthcare costs for households. And here's a few examples. Lowering prescription costs for Medicare enrollees, capturing insulin copays at $35 this year, benefiting nearly 30,000 Minnesotans. And the law also helped to lower healthcare insurance premiums for 15 million low and middle income Americans by extending the enhanced premium tax credits for the Affordable Care Act exchange plans. And here in Minnesota alone, 200,000 people have saved an average of nearly $200 on their ACA exchange plans this year. And as many of you are aware, we're getting ready to negotiate for good prices for our Medicare beneficiaries. The Inflation Reduction Act has also made the tax system fairer and more responsive, investing more than $80 billion over the next 10 years to increase tax enforcement for the wealthiest Americans, while also improving customer service for hardworking American families. And many of you have talked to me about improvement for customer service at the IRS. For example, the Inflation Reduction Act investments have already recovered $38 million from delinquent millionaires. $38 million of delinquent taxes have been recovered. All the while, the IRS has answered millions of more customer service phone calls and dramatically cut wait times. So in 1 year, it's clear that the Inflation Reduction Act is making a positive impact in the lives of Minnesota families, lowering everyday costs, creating millions of good paying jobs, and delivering the most significant, I can't stress this enough, the most significant action on climate in the history of the United States, all at the same time reducing the deficit. I want to point out, though, not one Republican supported the legislation, and now they are actively trying to undercut these investments for American families. Along with that, the GOP continues to deny climate change, and they are working to defund climate resilience investments and undermine the economic and environmental realities the Inflation Reduction Act is addressing. As many of you have asked me to do, I will continue to keep delivering for Minnesota and the nation. I will continue to hold the hope of my Republicans to come together to address the needs of American families and put their politics of chaos and crisis to bed. So I know we must keep moving forward on behalf of a nation of all Americans. And I thank those of you who submitted questions, and as was pointed out, our staff has worked together to kind of put them in a format and where I can address a lot of them at one time. So the next slide that's going to come up is going to tell you where we're going next. So we got a lot of questions on the environment, clean energy, and climate change. And I mentioned there is so much in the legislation that Democrats were able to pass last year, but I just want to highlight a few more things here about how the IRA is making a difference here in Minnesota. For example, the EPA is providing $50 million in funding for competitive grants for addressing air pollution. Here at schools, first day of school, we know that our children need to be in a clean, healthy environment, and to help monitor and reduce pollution and greenhouse gas emissions, especially in low income and disadvantaged communities where children are already suffering from asthma and other related diseases. So this means our school districts, local governments can partner with the EPA to receive technical assistance to lower their emissions and improve their air quality. And that's important for us to do. And that's just one example of what the Inflation Reduction Act is doing with empowering states, local governments, and tribal governments to build strong, sustainable energy strategies that they pick, that they choose, that they know that their communities need, because they're in the best position to know what their families and, as I said, their communities need. We've also seen great success with local community funding priorities. I'm especially proud to have secured $4.4 million for the city of Woodbury to connect 3 drinking water supply wells into a single raw water line to facilitate the connection to their water treatment facility. Woodbury residents have had to endure for years restrictions on health advisories and health concerns due to PFAS contamination. This project will enable the city of Woodbury to support public health and resilience in our potable water supply right here in the East Metro. And I was also proud to work with the Biden administration to establish a 20-year moratorium on mining upstream from the Boundary Waters Wilderness Canoe area. So that is a 20-year moratorium, but there's more to be done. So I've reintroduced my legislation, HR 2794, the Boundary Water Wilderness Protection and Pollution Act. And what that will do, it will permanently protect what we need to do for our Superior National Forest, which is in the watershed of the Boundary Waters, to make sure we protect that water. And we know how important water is becoming here in Minnesota, as we are now in our 2nd year of drought. And if you heard the reports today, more of the states in drought than it even was a year or so ago. Along with that, I want to point out that earlier this month, I visited in Shakopee, Minnesota, along with state, federal, and tribal leaders, a celebration. We celebrated the IRA's pollution reduction grants, which this project will be a recipient of. It's money to support more solar power and more ways to reduce greenhouse reduction. And that's just one of the many tools that Congress and the Biden administration has put forward for local governments and for communities to decide on what to do to address climate change and move us forward to a more sustainable future. This summer, as I said, we've all witnessed the heat and the extremes in temperature. And then I've been on the phone with my colleagues, texting and that, in Maui, in Hawaii, with the devastation that they faced there. We faced smoke from Canadian wildland fires, which are due large part to the change in our climate. But I want to point out that we can't take anything for granted right now for these projects that are moving forward. In fact, the EPA's Environmental Protection Agency has had their budget slashed nearly 40% by the Republicans in the House. So I'll be working really hard to restore those dollars as we move forward in conference committee, and to do what I can to move forward on protecting our environment. We cannot go backwards. So those are just some of the things that we've been working on with the environment and with clean energy and climate change. So our next bundle of questions that we did is on healthcare and retirement security. And that is something that I know all of us are, especially in Minnesota, we worry a lot about, making sure that we keep our healthcare system as resilient and working forward as possible. So a couple of the things that happened, I mentioned it in the Inflation Reduction Act, lowered health costs for millions of people. A lot of people are very concerned and wrote in about the prescription drug prices. As you know, we're going to start negotiating with to lower drug prices for Medicare. But I want to be clear, the pharmaceutical companies are ready to take the federal government to court. So we're going to have to win those court battles first. But at the same time, the Biden administration is moving forward on prescription drug negotiation prices for best price. I mentioned that lowered insurance premiums for many Americans and the savings that we saw right here. The other thing that I want to touch on that a lot of people have asked me about is reproductive health. And I want to give an example of the battle we're up against in Congress and why I said earlier, I think this is a move to have a national ban on abortion. We have people who serve in our military. 20% of our military is women. And these women, a lot of them live in red states that have restricted abortion to the point where doctors are afraid of losing their license for even helping women after rape, after miscarriage. I could go on and on. Working with the Biden administration in my role on the Defense Committee with other legislators, we led the charge for the Biden administration to put forward a plan. So if you're a service woman who has found yourself in either a life-threatening situation, an ectopic pregnancy, or found yourself a victim of domestic violence or violence perpetrated against you because of rape, we put forward a plan. Now, the federal government can't pay for that abortion in a lot of the cases, but what we were going to do for those women is allow them to be able to travel freely to states that would provide the health care that they or our service member's family member needed. Well, in the defense bill, Republicans prohibit the Biden administration for allowing what I consider a basic human right, women to seek the health care that they need based on advice from their doctor, consultation with their family, and with people of faith with their religious leaders. They prohibit women from being able to be allowed to travel. And by being allowed to travel, I mean the federal government would have paid for their travel, just their travel. We can't pay for abortions in many cases. There's only very few exceptions, but to pay for their travel to go to a state where it's legal. Now, why would you do that unless you're trying to ban abortions nationally? We've seen what is going on with the birth control, misoprostol, that has been used. It's just a matter of time before some of the folks in the Republican caucus who want to ban abortions nationally are going to move forward to do that. So when that comes to healthcare, I want you to know I'm so proud of the state of Minnesota. I'm so proud of so many states that have passed referendums where people have been totally taken back, even in red states where they said, no, there has to be exceptions. There has to be doctors and patients the ability to make a decision. So that is forefront for many of us right now in healthcare. And if we have the defense bill on the floor next week, you will see me trying to protect women's rights. Our service women who put their lives on the line should never be treated as second-class citizens when it comes to their healthcare. When it comes to retirement security, I want you to know that we're working hard on a Social Security Act that will allow for COLAs for seniors facing inflationary increases and making sure that Social Security and Medicare are protected. So we're with President Biden on that, and look out to see tax bills coming from the Republicans that will try to cut back some of these provisions. We've seen that with what they are trying to do with cutting back benefits for the WIC program, which is also in the tax bill, which provides nutrition for women, infants, and children. It's just draconian what's going on. What's our next one? Protecting our democracy.
Yes.
All right. So we've got just a little bit of a question here on democracy, and they were wide ranging. They were very, very expansive. One of the things that I thought was really interesting and something that I've been discussing with our staff is what we need to do about protecting our democracy. I mean, if you think about it, what we've been relying upon is our courts. And a lot of people don't feel that they can trust our courts to make a strong decision on protecting our democracy, especially when they've seen the extravagant trips and everything else that have been happening, that our Supreme Court justices have been taking from people who have legislation in front of the courts. So in my opinion, they're federal judges. They should abide by the federal ethics standards that all the other federal judges rely on, but we have no idea where we rely upon them for full disclosure. So I am working with Democrats in the Judiciary Committee to work on financial disclosures, ethical standards and requirements, and most importantly, recusal requirements for Supreme Court justices. In the last Congress, President Biden, in fact, did sign the Election Count Reform and Presidential Transition Improvement, and that clarified. We're all watching what's happening with President Trump and others who were part of January 6th trying to overthrow our government, right? So protecting our democracy. And that law made it clearly, and I'll read it, that the vice president's role in counting the electoral votes is solely ministerial. In fact, that the legislation limits grounds for where objections to the electoral count and certifies what senators and representatives should be looking at. When states send the electoral count and it's done the right way, as it was under the Biden administration, those votes needed to be counted. And Vice President Pence, who came into Congress with me, he upheld his duty. And we heard people calling for him to be hung in the Capitol halls on January 6th. We're also very, very worked on focused on what we need to do for the Voting Rights Act, protecting voting rights in Minnesota. We see that come under question, under attack every once in a while. Nationally, I wish more states were like Minnesota, where we protected those rights, but I'm very concerned at times that we haven't seen other states do that. And on a national election, that affects every one of us. So every state should be doing what it can. A couple questions came up about redistricting. Alabama was told by the Supreme Court to do a better job on their redistricting. They tinkered around the edges, sent something to the court, which many of us thought the court wouldn't accept, and they didn't. But we also need to come up with a national, I think, a redistricting policy so that every state is redistricting in a way in which we can have confidence that every vote, especially on a federal election, is counted, and every redistricting when it comes to federal government policies is done in a fair and an equitable way. So I want to thank you all for those questions on that. I'm going to wrap up here in a few minutes. We're checking how much time's left on national security and defense. Last Congress, I was the chair of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, which oversees all the spending for the Department of Defense and our intelligence community. This year, I'm the senior Democrat on this committee, but there's no question in my mind that the war between the United States and China would be devastating, and it must be avoided at all costs. One of the things that we talk about a lot is development, diplomacy, defense. And every Joint Chief under a Democrat or Republican president have all said to all of us, put more money in diplomacy and we will buy less bullets. So as the lead Democrat on the committee, that was a lot of our focus. working hand in hand with trying to get more funding into State Department for development and for diplomacy. The Republicans are going backwards on that and going upwards on defense. We don't need more defense spending. We need our defense spending to be spent more wisely. Let me give you an example of some of the things that I had been working on: climate change and resilience. The Department of Defense says that climate change is a national security issue. And by that, they mean that climate change developments around the world lead to instability, whether it's drought and less food being available, whether it's the immigration that we're seeing taking place. I was just coming in today and they were talking about all the souls lost off the coast of Greece. People are fleeing because of drought and conditions in their countries. Some are leaving because of dictatorships and human rights, but a lot of it's being driven by climate change right now. So I was focusing on what we could do with climate change, and I mentioned it in the other bills because we need to do more there. But just in our military bases alone, for example, we have runways in Alaska that can't function some of the time because of the permafrost thawing. We have radar facilities that are in areas where the permafrost is falling and they're in danger of going down. We have air bases now when the hurricanes come through that we have to fly the airplanes out of there, and then we spend billions and billions of dollars rebuilding them. So why not build those structures right in the first place? Why not make them resilient? Why not take the manufacturing things that we learn that are cutting edge to make these facilities more resilient and use them out in the private sector to help houses and businesses and industries build buildings that are more resilient? There are so many things that we can do, and we're not doing them. Instead, we, in my opinion, are shifting dollars needlessly towards equipment that is not needed, legacy, or is not wanted. A lot of things come up about the war in Ukraine. And I do support us standing together with the other democracies, doing what we need to do in order to protect a fledgling democracy. Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons and downsized its military because it thought that it would have the support of other democracies should Russia be aggressive. Russia was aggressive. They took the Crimea, and the democracies all stood together and said to Russia, now, don't do that again. And we thought, we had an agreement from Putin. But what did he do? He wanted to expand into Ukraine because he felt the democracies wouldn't stand up and support Ukraine. So I'm glad of the work that we're doing as democracies to support Ukraine. There are some who think we should do less. There's others who think we should do more. This is a very difficult situation, but the human rights violations and the fact that Russia determined on its own for no reason at all to attack Ukraine is just unbelievable. And then an issue that overlaps elections and national security is what is going on with some of the bad actors, whether it's China, whether it's Russia, or whether it is a terrorist organization with meddling in our elections, with what we need to do with cybersecurity now more than ever to protect our drinking supplies of water. We need to protect our electric grids. There's a lot of work that needs to be done here at home, and our defense bill, our Homeland Security bill, that's where we need to be focused. And by doing that, I mentioned we've got a cybersecurity up and running program at Metro State. They're also working with a community development nonprofit on Dale and University, NDC, and they're working on training a workforce, a diverse workforce that will also be able to help not only on our national security issues, but our economic issues here at home. So there's a lot going on in the Defense Committee, and I appreciate all the comments, all the suggestions that I get from constituents on that all the time. Now, we're down to a few minutes left, and so I'm going to just talk about keeping our economy strong, and there's so much we can do in that area. We need to really focus on making sure that our economy stays in the forefront. And that means passing our appropriation bills on time. It means keeping the government open and running. It means stopping the games that are being played in Washington. And it also is making these smart investments in the future workforce here at home, in the future manufacturing that I mentioned in BioMade, in the future of all the things that we can be doing to get our power grid stronger, to have more renewables added to it, and at the same time retraining workers that worked in the old energy into the new energy so that they and their families can feel successful and feel that they're part of the new economy. So part of that means also working with the labor movement to keep labor strong, the right to organize in the forefront, and to make sure that everyone feels that they have a chance to live the American dream. And right now, a lot of people are feeling very anxious with what's going on as we come out of COVID, the supply chain crisis, and what we've seen happen with inflation. So know that this is forefront in my mind. Without a strong economy, we can't have strong communities, we can't have strong families, we can't have a strong nation. So I'm very engaged in making sure that we make sure that our economy stays strong. One of the things that I was very disappointed on, another question that we had, was the child tax credit. The child tax credit that we put in during the time of the COVID crisis took so many children out of poverty. It provided $2,000 for a family barely making it. And the Republicans decided not to renew it. Instead, right now, what they're doing, the tax committee, is they're making permanent the Trump tax credits, their cuts, and the credits that they gave to big industry. And what did that do? It added to our deficit. It added substantially to our deficit. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that we're making our economy strong. And while we do that, everyone pays their fair share. And for those families that are struggling, those children are our future, to make sure that they have access to healthcare, good nutrition, and great schools. So that's how we keep our economy strong, not by passing tax cuts that don't benefit all Americans, only benefit the ultra wealthy. I'm not even talking about millionaires anymore. I'm talking about billionaires and large corporations that pay zero in taxes. While we see here in our district, hardworking people contributing to maintaining our roads, maintaining our water supply, maintaining our quality of life. Corporations and the ultra wealthy, they need to pay their fair share because they benefit from it too. So it's been really so great to have this opportunity to talk to you through the questions that you submitted. I look forward to continuing to being out in the district and doing things. We're trying this as a way to kind of communicate, but at the same time, not have any chaos with blowing up chat rooms and not being able to, get the important questions that people have all agreed upon that they wanted me to talk about. So that's what we did tonight. So we'd appreciate your feedback on this. And I look forward to being out in the district and doing small clutches around working with our legislators. So if you haven't signed up for our email updates, because sometimes people say, what's going on? So sign up for our email updates. We won't burden you with too many of them. We're on Twitter/X if you want to know what's going on day to day. We have Facebook, and Facebook seems to be a way a lot of you like to communicate with our office, and we appreciate that. We also have started having outreach community service hours in which our staff is going to libraries and people are coming with Social Security questions, veterans issues, and other things like that. If you have a passport, I want you to, after we're done, go check the date on it. And if you have less than 6 months on it, I wish you would have let us know 6 months ago, but let us know right away. It's important to keep your passport up to date. We have been deluged with people now wanting to travel and not having looked at their passports to do that. Our phone numbers are both on here. Our Washington office stands ready to help you with tours or anything you're doing in Washington, D.C. So for additional information about all the other things we work on, from veterans to student loans to what we have going on right now with passports, just reach out to us. I want to thank you all for being with us tonight. I wish you all good health. If you haven't gotten your flu and COVID shot yet, think about doing it. COVID's on the uptick, and there's a way to help prevent it possibly from you even getting it, but also to make sure if you do get it, it is in a way that your body can really fight back on it. So stay healthy, stay well, and thank you so very much.